Welcome to our channel. Today we're talking about the book, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. Living the Wisdom of the Tao.
By Wayne Dyer.
Yes, by Wayne Dyer.
Yeah.
This book is all about tapping into ancient wisdom for modern day living.
Right.
And you know how much I love that kind of stuff.
Me too.
If you're already feeling inspired and want to kind of dive deeper into the world of positivity and mindfulness, check out affirmifyjourney.com.
Yes.
You've got tons of motivational content and even personalized affirmations based on your zodiac sign.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how Dyer takes this ancient text, the Tao Te Ching, and makes it so relevant to our lives today.
Right. It's not like a dusty old scripture.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a practical guide to finding more peace and purpose.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about the Tao Te Ching. It's not tied to any specific religion. It's just about aligning yourself with the natural flow of the universe.
Okay.
What Laozi called the Tao.
So the Tao, it sounds kind of mystical and abstract.
Right.
What's a good way to kind of wrap our heads around it?
Dyer uses this great analogy of a potter shaping clay.
Okay.
The Tao is like the formless clay full of potential,
Mm-hmm.
and the 10,000 things that Laozi talks about
Okay.
for all the different forms that the clay can take.
Yeah.
So we're not just the finished product, we're also that raw, creative potential.
Oh, so in a way, we are the Tao.
Exactly.
Okay. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, and I think it's a really empowering idea.
Yeah.
We have this incredible well of creativity and wisdom within us.
Yeah. Which leads us to one of the big themes of the book, living in the mystery. I have to admit that sounds a little intimidating
Yeah.
in our world where we're supposed to have all the answers.
Right,
Yeah.
but think about it this way. When we cling to needing to know everything, to control every outcome,
Mm-hmm.
we create so much stress for ourselves.
So this living in the mystery thing, is it about letting go of that need for control?
Exactly. Dyer points out that the very first verse of the Tao Te Ching is about embracing the unknown, finding comfort in not having all the answers.
That's kind of a radical idea, especially in a world that's, obsessed with information overload.
Yeah, it is, but it's also incredibly freeing.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine letting go of those rigid expectations and just allowing life to unfold. It's about trusting that things are happening as they should.
It's like we're learning to dance with life rather than trying to choreograph every step.
I love that analogy. And Dyer gives some really practical tips for how to do this.
Okay.
He talks about letting go of rigid expectations in relationships, for example,
Okay.
allowing them to unfold organically.
Instead of trying to force them into some preconceived mold.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of being present rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Learning to live in the mystery.
Yeah.
Another big idea that Dyer explores is duality and paradox.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, right away in verse 2, Lao Tzu introduces this idea that opposites are actually interdependent.
Yeah.
He says, being and non-being create each other.
Mm-hmm.
Dyer interprets this as a call to move beyond those black and white judgments that we often get stuck in.
So instead of seeing things as good or bad, right or wrong,
Right.
we start to see the interconnectedness of everything.
Precisely. And I think this is such a powerful shift in perspective
Yeah.
because it allows us to move through life with more compassion and understanding.
Mm.
Dyer gives the example of a daffodil and a daisy.
Right.
They're both beautiful in their own way,
Yeah.
and that beauty doesn't require comparison.
That's such a great visual. So it's like we're all part of this beautiful tapestry, each thread adding its own unique color and texture.
Exactly. And when we can see that interconnectedness, it changes everything.
Now, there's another concept I think a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah.
The ego.
Yeah.
How does Dyer address that through the lens of the Tao?
He ties this idea of moving beyond ego to the feminine energy of creation, what he calls the divine mother.
Okay.
It's about tapping into that effortless flow of creativity that we see in young children
Yeah.
before the ego really takes hold.
So it's about reclaiming that sense of playfulness and wonder that we often lose as adults.
Exactly. Dyer points to verse 6, which talks about this feminine energy as the source of all things.
Okay.
He says it's like the way a baby moves through the world, full of curiosity and delight, without any need to acquire or achieve.
It's about being present and engaged with life rather than constantly striving for something more.
And then verse 7 gets right to the heart of the ego trap.
Okay.
It talks about the limitations of living a life that's solely focused on external achievements and possessions.
It's like a wake-up call.
Yes.
Hey, you already have enough. True fulfillment comes from within, not from chasing more.
I think that's such a powerful message, especially in our consumer-driven society.
Okay, so we've got living in the mystery, embracing duality,
Yeah.
and moving beyond the ego. Now, Dyer introduces another fascinating concept, the inner void. What's that all about? It sounds a little, well, empty.
It might sound that way at first, but it's actually about tapping into a source of incredible power and wisdom.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Dyer is talking about the space from which our thoughts and perceptions arise. Verse 10 of the Tao Te Ching says, "Carry your soul and embrace your spirit. Can you do this without straying?"
Okay.
Dyer interprets this as a call to connect with that deep, still place within us.
It sounds like what people talk about when they describe the experience of meditation.
You're exactly right. And Dyer emphasizes that practicing mindfulness is key to becoming more aware of this inner void and allowing it to guide our actions.
So it's not about emptying our minds completely,
Right.
but about creating space for stillness and insight to emerge.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the answers we seek aren't always going to be found in the external world. Sometimes we have to go inward to find them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a challenge to cultivate that inner stillness
Yeah.
in a world that's constantly bombarding us with distractions.
Which is why Dyer also emphasizes the importance of living an unhurried life.
Okay, I can already feel myself relaxing just thinking about that.
Right.
What does Dyer say about creating a more unhurried pace of life?
In verse 15, Lao Tzu talks about the qualities of the ancient masters.
Okay.
He describes them as watchful, alert, yet simple and yielding.
Okay.
They weren't rushing around trying to force things to happen.
Yeah.
They were attuned to the natural rhythm of life.
It's like they were moving with the Tao,
Exactly.
not against it.
Yes. And Dyer encourages us to observe life's cycles in the same way.
Okay.
Without judgment, he reminds us that endings are also beginnings.
Right.
And that change is a constant.
So it's not about resisting change or trying to cling to how we think things should be,
Right.
but about accepting the natural ebb and flow of life.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another important idea. Questioning our reliance on rules.
Okay, I'm a little confused. Don't we need rules to function as a society?
Of course, external rules and regulations have their place.
It's okay.
But in verse 18, Lao Tzu encourages us to look beyond those external rules
Okay.
and connect with our own inner knowing.
So it's about trusting our own inner compass
Yes,
rather than always looking to external sources for validation or guidance.
exactly. It's about cultivating that sense of personal responsibility and living from a place of integrity.
Now I'm starting to see a thread here. Living in the mystery,
Yeah.
letting go of the ego,
Yes.
cultivating inner stillness,
Right.
questioning external rules.
Yeah.
It all seems to point back to this idea of surrendering to something larger than ourselves.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that takes us to a few related concepts in the book that are all about releasing attachment, living without clinging to outward forms,
Right.
living without constantly striving for future benefit,
Yeah.
and living without excess.
All right, let's unpack those one by one.
Okay.
First up, living without attachment to outward forms. What does that mean exactly?
In verse 19, Lao Tzu cautions against getting too caught up in things like sainthood, wisdom, or even morality.
Okay.
He's suggesting that true virtue comes from within, not from external labels or achievements.
So it's not about trying to be good or wise, but about allowing those qualities to flow naturally from our connection to the Tao.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we already embody those qualities and we don't need external validation to prove it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about living without striving? Isn't it good to have goals and aspirations?
Of course, it's natural to have aspirations.
Yeah.
But in verse 20, Lao Tzu addresses that constant striving for future benefit
Yeah.
that can keep us from fully experiencing the present moment.
It's like we're always chasing that carrot on a stick,
Right.
thinking I'll be happy with
Yes.
it. You know?
And we miss out on all the joy and beauty that's available to us right now.
Yeah.
Dyer encourages us to embrace the present moment
Okay.
and see unexpected events as gifts from the universe.
So it's about letting go of that I'll be happy when mentality and finding joy in the journey itself.
Yes. And finally, there's the idea of living without excess. I have a feeling this one might resonate with a lot of us.
It definitely hits home for me.
In verse 24, Lao Tzu talks about how clinging to excess actually creates a sense of lack.
Okay.
He encourages us to cultivate gratitude for what we have and to practice generosity.
It's about recognizing that true abundance isn't about how much we accumulate, but about our capacity to share and appreciate.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from what do I need to what can I give?
This is all such great food for thought. We've covered so much ground already, but there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah.
And change your thoughts, change your lives.
Absolutely. We've just scratched the surface of the wisdom that Dyer unpacks in this book.
Yeah.
There's so much more to discover about finding inner peace, embracing change,
Yeah.
and living in alignment with the Tao.
Awesome. So we've talked about letting go of excess, but what about those times when we feel like we're drowning in chaos?
Right.
How can we stay calm and centered when everything around us feels out of control?
That's where verse 26 comes in. It's a powerful reminder that our inner peace doesn't have to be dictated by external circumstances.
Right.
Dyer talks about how we always have the power to choose our response.
It's like we can't always control the waves,
Right.
but we can learn to surf.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our emotions are like waves. They come and go, but we don't have to get swept away by them. We can learn to ride them out.
So it's not about denying our feelings or pretending that everything is okay when it's not.
Exactly.
It's about finding that place of inner stillness
Right.
amidst the storm.
And that leads us to another important concept, living naturally without force.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
In verse 23, Laozi reminds us that the Tao operates effortlessly without striving or forcing.
Okay.
It's like the way nature unfolds. A seed doesn't struggle to become a tree.
Right.
It simply grows following its natural course.
So we're talking about surrendering to the bigger picture, trusting that things are happening as they should.
Yes.
Well.
And that takes us to the power of flexibility, which is beautifully illustrated in verse 22.
Ooh, flexibility. That's something I definitely need to work on. Tell me more.
Lao Tzu uses the image of a palm tree bending in the wind.
Okay.
The palm tree doesn't resist the wind. It bends with it, and that's how it survives.
It's a beautiful image. It reminds me that rigidity can actually make us more vulnerable.
Right.
Especially during challenging times.
Exactly. Dyer encourages us to cultivate that same flexibility within ourselves, to learn to adapt and go with the flow, rather than getting stuck in resistance.
Okay, so we've got staying calm in the midst of chaos,
Right.
living naturally, and embracing flexibility.
Yes.
And all of this seems to tie back to the idea of living without force, which we touched on earlier.
You're right. And verse 30 really dives deep into the destructiveness of force, both physically and mentally.
Okay.
Dyer points out that force always creates counterforce,
Yeah.
leading to a vicious cycle of violence.
It's like that saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind.
Exactly. And then in verse 31, Lao Tzu cautions against using weapons,
Okay.
not just physical weapons,
Right.
but also harmful words and gestures.
Because those could be just as damaging, if not more so.
Absolutely. And Dyer reminds us that violence always starts with a thought. So if we want to create a more peaceful world, it starts with cultivating peace within ourselves.
It's about making conscious choices to respond with kindness, rather than aggression, with understanding, rather than judgment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And those choices lead to a more fulfilling and authentic way of living, which brings us to a few key ideas.
Okay.
Letting go of the need to control, recognizing the wisdom within each of us, and embracing simplicity.
I love those ideas.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how we can put them into practice.
Well, verse 37 encourages us to live in alignment with our true nature. Dyer reminds us that the Tao doesn't have any standards or judgments.
Okay.
It simply is. And we can find that same sense of ease and authenticity when we stop trying to be something we're not.
So it's about getting out of our own way and allowing our true selves to shine through.
Exactly. And verse 39 builds on this idea by emphasizing the interconnectedness of all things.
Okay.
We're not separate, isolated individuals.
Yeah.
We're part of a vast web of life.
It reminds me of that beautiful saying, we are all just walking each other home.
That's perfect. And speaking of walking each other home, there are 3 verses that offer really practical guidance on how to cultivate this interconnected way of being.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
First up is verse 55, which encourages us to let go of our need to control.
Okay.
Dyer reminds us that we actually attract more good fortune when we surrender to the Tao.
It's about trusting that the universe has our back.
Exactly. And then there's verse 56, which highlights the power of silent knowing. It's about spending time in quiet contemplation, observing, rather than reacting.
It's about recognizing that sometimes the answers we seek are found in stillness, not in words.
Yes. And finally, verse 51 focuses on hidden virtue,
Okay.
the natural, effortless flow of goodness that comes from aligning ourselves with the Tao.
Mm.
Dyer encourages us to trust our inner guidance rather than seeking external validation.
It's about recognizing that we already have everything we need within us to live a good and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And that leads us to verse 58, which offers a really helpful perspective on how to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
We all need a little help with that sometimes.
Verse 58 encourages us to find balance in the midst of those ups and downs.
Good.
Dyer suggests that we see wholeness in place of fortune or misfortune,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that everything is in a constant state of change.
It's about not getting too caught up in the temporary nature of external events and remembering that there's a bigger picture unfolding.
Exactly. And that brings us to verse 62, which reminds us that the Tao is a source of abundance and refuge for all beings.
I love that imagery. It's like a safe haven we can always return to no matter what's happening in the world around us.
Precisely. And Dyer suggests that we respond to negativity with compassion and understanding, helping to guide others back to that sense of peace and interconnectedness.
It's about meeting darkness with light, not with more darkness.
Beautifully said. Now let's shift gears a bit and explore how to take action in a way that's aligned with the Tao.
Okay, I'm ready to put all this wisdom into practice.
Well, verse 63 emphasizes the importance of addressing challenges when they're still small.
Okay.
And practicing non-action, which might sound a little paradoxical.
Non-action, now that sounds intriguing.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually about effortless effort, about allowing things to unfold naturally rather than forcing them.
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And verse 64 reminds us to focus on being present. Dyer encourages us to find the gifts hidden in challenging experiences and take life one day at a time.
It's about focusing on what we can control, which is our attitude and our actions in this present moment.
Got it. And speaking of taking action, verse 65 offers some valuable insights on leadership.
Ooh, leadership. This applies to so many areas of life.
Right.
Whether we're leading a team at work, raising a family, or just navigating our own personal journeys.
Absolutely. Verse 65 advocates for humility and simplicity in leadership.
Okay.
It's about guiding others to their own true nature rather than imposing our will upon them.
It's about empowering others to find their own way, not dictating what that way should be.
Exactly. And verse 66 uses a really powerful metaphor to illustrate this idea, the image of the sea.
Okay. I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this sea metaphor.
The sea is vast and powerful, yet it also stays low and yielding. It receives all the rivers that flow into it without resistance. And Dyer reminds us that true strength often comes from serving others, not from dominating them.
It's about leading with humility and compassion, not with force or ego.
Exactly. And that brings us to the 3 treasures that Laozi introduces in verse 67.
Okay, I'm ready to uncover these treasures.
The 3 treasures are mercy, frugality, and humility.
Okay.
And Dyer explains that these qualities are far more valuable than any outward riches.
So it's not about what we have, but about how we be in the world.
Precisely. Mercy or compassion is about extending kindness and understanding to all beings, including ourselves.
Yeah.
Frugality is about appreciating what we have and not needing excess.
Right.
And humility is about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that no one is superior to another.
These are powerful qualities to cultivate both in ourselves and in the world around us.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another pair of concepts that build upon these treasures. Living without enemies and living a God-realized life.
I love where this is going. Tell me more.
Well, in verse 69, Lao Tzu challenges the concept of enemies.
Okay.
He suggests that true strength lies in cooperation, not competition, and that seeing others as separate from ourselves only leads to more conflict and suffering.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our interconnectedness.
Exactly. And verse 70 encourages us to live a life that's aligned with the Tao, letting our actions speak louder than words.
It's about walking our talk.
Precisely. Dyer suggests that we live authentically without the need for external validation.
It's about being true to ourselves, trusting that who we are is enough.
Yes. And that takes us to another powerful pairing. Living without sickness and living with awe and acceptance.
Okay, I'm ready for another dose of wisdom.
Verse 71 presents this fascinating paradox. It says that we must become sick of sickness to experience true health.
That's a thought-provoking idea. What does Dyer say about this?
He suggests that we shift our thinking from fear and anxiety to a state of natural well-being.
So it's about focusing on what we want to create, not on what we're afraid of.
Exactly. And verse 72 emphasizes the importance of awe and acceptance.
Okay.
Dyer encourages us to see perfection in imperfection, recognizing that everything is unfolding as it should.
It's about finding beauty in the unexpected, the unconventional, the so-called flaws.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another powerful metaphor that Laozi uses to illustrate the interconnectedness of all things.
Right.
The image of heaven's net.
Okay, this sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this net metaphor.
In verse 73, Laozi uses this image of a net to show how everything in the universe is interconnected. And Dyer encourages us to trust the natural timing of events, recognizing that everything unfolds as it should.
It's about releasing our need to control outcomes and trusting that the universe has a plan.
Exactly. And that takes us to the final chapter of the book, which focuses on accepting death as a natural part of life.
This could be a tough one to grapple with. What insights does Dyer offer on this topic?
Well, in verse 74, Dyer encourages us to connect with our immortal essence, the part of us that cannot be harmed.
The part of us that lives on even after our physical bodies are gone.
Exactly. And he reminds us that death is not an ending, but a transition to a new beginning.
It's a shift in perspective, a way of seeing death not as something to be feared, but as a natural part of the cycle of life.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final 3 verses of the Tao Te Ching, which offer some really beautiful guidance on how to live a fulfilling life.
Okay, I'm ready to soak up this final dose of wisdom. I'm ready for it. What wisdom does Lao Tzu impart in these final verses?
Verse 75 is all about demanding little from others.
Okay.
And trusting their inherent wisdom. Dyer suggests that when we try to control or manipulate people, we actually stifle their growth.
It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own unique journey, and we can support them by simply trusting their process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then in verse 76, Lao Tzu emphasizes the strength and flexibility.
Okay.
He reminds us that those who are rigid will break, while those who bend will prevail.
It's like that old saying, the oak breaks in the storm, the willow bends.
I love that. It speaks to the power of adaptability and resilience.
Yeah, it makes me think of how we can apply this to our own lives. You know? When we encounter challenges, are we digging in our heels and resisting? Or are we finding ways to adapt and flow with the changes?
That's such a great question to ask ourselves. And then finally, verse 77 encourages us to give back to the world.
Okay.
Lao Tzu suggests that true abundance comes from sharing our surplus.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web of life.
Yeah.
And that our own well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
Exactly. When we operate from a place of scarcity, we're constantly trying to protect and hoard what we have.
Yeah.
But when we recognize the abundance that's all around us, we naturally want to share.
Now we're down to the final 2 verses.
Oh.
I'm curious to see how Lao Tzu wraps things up.
Well, verse 78 uses the image of water
Okay.
to illustrate the power of softness and persistence.
Okay.
Dyer talks about how water can carve through rock not by force, but by its consistent, gentle flow.
It's a beautiful metaphor. It reminds me that sometimes the most effective way to overcome obstacles isn't through brute force, but through gentle persistence.
And finally, verse 79 focuses on the importance of forgiveness.
Okay.
Dyer reminds us that holding on to resentment and anger only harms ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
That's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is definitely a practice, but it's one that ultimately frees us from the pain of the past.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the very last verse of the Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
Verse 80. Lao Tzu paints a picture of a simple and contented life. A life that's free from the pursuit of material possessions and unnecessary complexities.
It's about finding joy in the simple things, the everyday miracles that we often take for granted.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from what we have, but from who we are and how we choose to experience the world.
Wow, what a journey this has been. We've explored so many powerful ideas today about letting go of control, embracing change, and living in alignment with the Tao.
Yeah.
And it all started with changing our thoughts.
It's amazing how much power our thoughts have. As Wayne Dyer reminds us in Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, when we shift our perspective, we literally transform our reality.
And if our listeners are looking for more inspiration and support on this journey of personal transformation, where can they go?
Don't forget to check out Affirmifyjourney.com. They have tons of resources to help you cultivate a more positive and mindful mindset, including personalized affirmations based on your zodiac sign.
It's a great way to start each day with intention and focus. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, we invite you to reflect on what resonated with you today. What one thought will you choose to focus on to create a more peaceful, joyful, and fulfilling life?
Thanks for joining us on this